Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That did take quite a while. Actually, almost as long as they're giving the public of New Zealand to consider this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I think the onus very clearly is on the government to justify why legislation should be introduced today, have 4 working days for the public to put together submissions and be heard on it before it's reported back next Tuesday. I've been in this House a long time and I can't think of any legislation of this nature that has been rammed through with such unseemly haste. If the government were to make the case to us that there were real and imminent threats that without this legislation New Zealanders would be at much greater risk, I would listen to that case. But Mr. Speaker, I have not heard that case put tonight. It has not been put tonight. Our threat level is low. That is the government's official threat level, low. What does low mean? Low means a terrorist threat is possible, but it's not likely. The Australian threat level is much higher. Yet the Australian government has still been prepared to put its parallel legislation through a full select committee process in both Houses of Parliament, the Senate and the House of Representatives. In the United Kingdom, the threat level is either high or extreme. It is much higher than New Zealand. The risks are much higher. Has the Conservative government in the United Kingdom suggested that they should rush through legislation in 2 days? No, they said they're putting it on a fast track. You know what a fast track means? They hope to have it back in the House of Commons by May of next year. May of next year. So our 2 Westminster democracies that we would compare ourselves to have chosen to deal with similar legislation in a quite different way. Normally, when we introduce a bill to the House, we give people 4 to 6 weeks to put together considered submissions. We hear submissions over 2 to 4 weeks. We then wait for a departmental report, and that might take a couple more weeks, and then we have a couple of weeks for consideration and deliberation. On a fast track, we might do that in 14 weeks. On a normal track, we would take 6 months, and this government wants to do it in a week. 1 week. Now, I am asking sincerely for the government to put up any speaker that can tell us why the threat is so urgent in New Zealand that we have to disregard normal democratic process and have 4 working days to hear submissions. Now, David Shearer and I have worked closely with the government. I'm sorry they haven't worked closely with New Zealand First and the Green Party. David Shearer and I suggested last week that the bill could have been introduced last week, so it was on the table for everybody to read. The government chose not to take our advice on that. They did take our advice that it should go out last week to a number of important organisations. Organisations like the Council for Civil Liberties, the Council of Trade Unions, the New Zealand Law Society, the Human Rights Commission, the Privacy Commissioner, the Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand. I'm glad they picked that suggestion up. But there are hundreds and hundreds of people out there that will be worried about this legislation, that will want a chance to have their voice heard. What is a democracy about, Mr. Speaker? It's about giving ordinary New Zealanders the chance to have a say on the legislation that rules their life. Are they being given this chance? Most New Zealanders will be excluded from having their say by this government's decision. And Chris Hipkins's amendment is a very sensible, reasonable one. If the government's really worried, let's come back early from our holidays. The government prepared to do that? I don't think so. What's wrong with the 10th of February as a date by which the Select Committee hears back on this legislation? Why do we need time? Because the issues that we are considering in this legislation are fundamentally important issues. Yes, we have a responsibility in this House to protect and safeguard New Zealanders. We also have a responsibility to protect and safeguard their rights. And we are introducing, for the first time to the SIS, the right to have surveillance without a warrant for 48 hours. I'm worried about that. Why does it take 48 hours? That seems totally unreasonable to me. Will we be able to consider that properly in 4 working days? We are introducing legislation that will take passports off people while they're overseas. Maybe in some cases it's necessary, but I want to know the implications of that. Have we got a watertight guarantee that we're not going to leave people stranded on the other side of the world, unable to come home? I'm told that that's what the intention will be, give them travel documents, not in the bill. How do we know that it's going to happen? We're going to give visual surveillance powers to the SIS. May well be justified, but let's consider it carefully because this is another intrusion into the lives of people. I'm not worried about the terrorist. I am worried about ordinary innocent people finding that they have an invasion of their privacy and a loss of rights that might not be proper. And when we think about when we deny passports to people, there are some cases where we ought to do that. But I want to know the government's thought this through thoroughly and that we don't take passports off the family that happens to be Islamic from Pakistan or Iraq or Syria. I've got all of those communities in my electorate. I want to know that when they've got a wedding or a funeral to attend, that there's not going to be an arbitrary removal of their passport. What are the safeguards? Have we covered ourselves off properly on this? Let's look at the way this legislation's been handled. ISIS has been around all year. Why did we leave it till now, 3 weeks before we rise for Christmas, to bring in the legislation? Why didn't the government act earlier? The officials were given 4 weeks to do a review. Normally the officials would do a review like this over a year. So they may have made mistakes. They may have made mistakes. I looked at the disclosure, departmental disclosure statement. How many members of the government ranks have read this, that have spoken on it? Any? No, you haven't. And what does it say? External consultation. Has there been any external consultation on the policy to be given effect by this bill? Consultation occurred within government. Oh, that's nice. Within government. External consultation was not undertaken given the nature of the subject matter addressed by the bill. Don't know why that would be the case. And the limited time available to conduct the review and develop legislation. So we rush the officials to prepare a report in 4 weeks. We do no external consultation. We give ordinary New Zealanders a period of time that they cannot possibly meet to make submissions. And we're dealing with basic constitutional issues here that we desperately need to get right, because if we don't get them right, it will be counterproductive to the objective of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is an appalling abuse of process. 4 working days for New Zealanders. Actually, they don't have 4 working days to make submission. They've got 2. You know, if they're lucky, they're listening to the debate tonight and they can say, hell, we better do something quickly. Most of them won't even know that there is a bill here before the date for closing submissions comes upon them. How can that be good? How many times have we seen in this House, Mr. Speaker, putting legislation through in haste and getting it wrong? There's a reason why we have a select committee process. It's so that people can have an input, so that people can have confidence about the legislation that we are passing, and so that we can bring people on side with what we're doing, so they understand what we're trying to do is in the wider interests of New Zealand, and that we're listening to them so we get it right. There are huge risks in doing this. I put it to you, Mr. Speaker, there are very few risks in allowing this legislation to be heard through and reported back by the 10th of February next year. Still fast-tracked, but at least giving people the reasonable opportunity to make submissions on this bill to help make sure that we get it right. This is abusive process. This cannot or has not been justified. I'm waiting and waiting for the government side to come out with an argument as to why they're doing this. I am listening in good faith and I'm hearing nothing that justifies rushing this legislation through. I will be sympathetic to elements of this legislation. I am not at all sympathetic to the way that you're trying to ram this through the House, because I believe that we will get fundamental things wrong, and we will act in haste, and we will repent at leisure about legislation that does not have the effect that we want it to have to protect New Zealanders, their safety and their rights.
The question is that the amendment in the name of Chris Hipkins be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The noes have it. The noes have it. Party vote called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
60 opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes in favour.
Green Party.
14 in favour.
New Zealand First.
11 in favour.
Māori Party.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, I've just come in and I'm unclear. Are we voting for this one or this one?
It's
right.
the amendment.
The amendment, thank you. Māori Party, 2 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
1 opposed.
United Future.
1 opposed.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 59, the noes are 62. The motion is lost. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Those to the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
60 in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes opposed. He's on his way.
Green Party.
14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
11 opposed.
Māori Party.
2 votes opposed.
Act New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 62, the noes are 59. The motion is agreed to. Call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Education Amendment Bill number 2, second reading.
Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Hekia Parata.
I move